Today we're going to review a critique of an article by Frank Goodnow. The article is What Jesus Says to Public Administration, written by Lance deHaven-Smith in 2003. This is a general overview of the purpose of the article. The author makes several detailed points that won't be covered. Overall, deHaven-Smith asserts that there are weaknesses in public administration that can only be addressed by a transformation based strictly on the teachings of the historical or political Jesus. He says that there's a propensity toward tyranny and imperialism, and that what we need is mercy over justice and servant leadership rather than rulers. He also distinguishes Christianity and Jesus. Christianity, he says, is institutionalized religion or man-made, so it's subject to human failings. The article is critiqued from the point of view of Frank Goodnow, a leader of his time in shaping public administration. He was writing in the early 1900s during the Progressive era. The Reform era set out to deal with corruption by raising standards of honesty and moving to the merit system and growing public services. It also sought to increase accountability and responsibility, use scientific methods to solve problems, and improve efficiencies. He wrote of the importance of separation of powers. However, they could not be disconnected. Public administration is the execution of the will of the state, while politics is the expression of the will of the state. Public administration is subordinate to politics because politics is the representation of the people. We have to acknowledge that the differences in the periods of time, social and political events of the times, shape public discourse and perspectives. Generally speaking, Goodnow would say that the indictments made by deHaven-Smith were not warranted or relevant to public administration. The first indictment is that public administration is systemically immoral. The American system of government is established by the Constitution and includes the separation of powers, which requires the executing authority, which would be administration, to be subordinate to the expressing or political authority. The party system of government secures the harmonious relationship between the powers and is supported by and can only be transformed by the people. The purpose of public administration is to carry out the business of government, not to make laws or judge them. Public administration is not the legislative branch. Next, deHaven-Smith asserts that there is a general lack of understanding about the lessons taught and modeled by Jesus. He would also say that in order to achieve a higher law, we would need to abandon what he would consider idols of the American government. Again, the indictment here is not relevant to public administration, according to what Goodnow would think. deHaven-Smith would say that we cannot understand what Jesus has to say because values other than ones taught by the historical Jesus cloud our perception. Again, and not to sound like a broken record, it's the will of the people that drives public policy, not the role of the administrator, but the legislative branch elected by the state or the people. deHaven-Smith would also say that science removes intellect. While as a product of the Progressive era, Goodnow would likely say that the scientific methods of management create systems to improve work and understanding. Additionally, Goodnow would assert that the validity of the values held by democracy, and that while governance is imperfect, it does move us toward justice, honesty, freedom, and the greater good. Goodnow would also likely say that public discourse and the pursuit of differing ideas is what moves government forward. The next general point against public administration is that public administration lacks accountability and responsibility. Once again, I think Goodnow would say that the indictment is not relevant or warranted against public administration. Progressive reform worked to increase accountability and responsibility and to grow public services, which would equate to the mercy that deHaven-Smith was referring to. Goodnow asserted in his writings that public administration is confined to the executing function and is subordinate to politics, and would likely argue that public administration is subservient to, or is a servant leader of, the expression of the will of the state or politics. And when it comes to the accusation of ethics, Goodnow would concede that the ethical principles are often excluded in politics when referring to influencing public opinion, attracting voters, and securing support. So to summarize, the purpose of the article by deHaven-Smith was to establish a framework to assert that there needs to be a change in the nature of public administration. He asserted that the discipline of public administration should move from a profession into a more social and political movement. A review by Goodnow, a theorist from the early 20th century, would say that changing the nature or purpose of public administration would cause chaos and discord. He would say that the role of public administration is to carry out the business of government, and if there was a need for social and political movement, public administration is not the appropriate authority to do so.